Hello, today we're going to cover Constructionism. So Constructionism builds on top of Constructivism. And what it adds to that theory is that students learn better and more deeply if they're creating an artifact that they are going to share with the public, and that they have agency over what they're learning because they're learning the things they need to learn to make that project. So it's really about giving them a reason they care about to learn. Okay. So for example, Legos. If our goal is to get kids to build Legos, which frankly it often is, because playing with physical three-dimensional toys like this has been associated with higher success in STEM fields. So spatial relations and being able to do things spatially is an important skill that people have. And so this is actually a very good example as Legos. And so, though I have to admit, I would not say that Constructionism is exactly like Legos. It's more that the entire lab, that the MIT Media Lab that coined and came up with a theory for Constructionism, is all about learning like we did when we were young, before boring school changed the way we were. And so their lab is the Lifelong Kindergarten Lab. And so these types of things, these learning experiences, are what inspire them to create things. And so you're going to read about that in the introduction, about this Gears experience of the author. So think about potentially Legos, or if there's something else in your life that as a child you got super into and ended up learning a lot about it. Okay, so Constructionism is already used in schools before this necessarily way of thinking was applied to it. But if you think of in science, a science fair, that is really Constructionism, but not applied to computer science. Because the idea is that if you're creating this to show other people, you'll do it to higher quality. And you're choosing the problem that you're going to do an experiment on. And so hopefully you'll care about that problem, and you'll follow the process, the scientific process. And so what they care about teaching you is the process, not the actual information that you're learning from that particular experiment. And so that's why students are able to choose whatever area they want. They all follow the same process, and hopefully now they all learned it. Okay, so if we take what's the opposite of Constructionism? And it's worksheets. People talk very, very negatively about worksheets. When I was a kid, I had a ton of worksheets, workbooks. I had very, very little hands-on learning after I got out of kindergarten. And so everything from first grade on that I can remember in school was all worksheets. I'm hoping that your education was not all worksheets. Maybe it was still some worksheets, because maybe you have to learn that way at some points, but there's a lot more project-based learning now. So if we look at this particular worksheet, they're trying to engage the students by hiding a picture in here that you color in by doing multiplication. And so we can clearly see that multiplication is the goal. And you're sort of convincing the student to do it because of some reward that they'll get from coloring this picture. So you'll be experiencing this with your game. In some sense, this is an incredibly poor example of gamification, in that they're trying to put boring multiplication into a more engaging context for the student. And you're doing that in this course, in the project, but yours needs to be much more engaging than this worksheet, and needs to feel like playing a game. So the MIT Media Lab created Scratch. Scratch is a programming environment for children that is built on constructionist philosophy. You share your projects. It gets put in, it's viewable once you share it. Anyone can see it. People can comment. People can like it. And so you're supposed to be getting a lot of positive interaction from that. And it's also very easy to take code from other people's projects. And in fact, to remix, to take their project entirely and then just make modifications of it. And the idea is to focus on the end product and that students will learn along the way. So there are downsides to constructionism. And so here are three. One is that you necessarily get holes in student knowledge, because if they get full control over the project and their project didn't require certain things you were hoping they learned, then they're not going to learn it. So there's no guarantee of coverage of learning unless you have requirements for the project. So your final project is a constructionist project. You are getting to choose the game you create with certain requirements. And so those requirements that I put in the final project are to prevent too big a holes in your student knowledge. Okay? Another challenge is choosing a project of appropriate difficulty. Children, especially who have very introductory skills, are just incapable of building what they imagine. And what's interesting is that very young children just pretend that what they've built is what they wanted to build. My daughter went to I think it was a 4-year-old birthday party, either 3 or 4-year-old birthday party, when she was a few months older than the child. And they gave them all Play-Doh and they had them sit down. And they said, okay, make a rabbit. And all of the children took their lump of Play-Doh and just smooched it around, and they were like, I've got a rabbit. And my child made a rabbit. Like, she sat there and she made a head and she made a body and she made 2 ears. And that to me was a big eye-opening moment, because I saw that all the rest of the children were just pretending. And I've since learned how important pretending is for children, for when because then they can feel like they did something far beyond their skills. But if you take a 5th grade student, they're no longer necessarily willing to pretend that what they built is useful to the world. My daughter now, in 4th grade, I can get her to do stuff, but sometimes she's like, well, how is this going to be used? And once she figures out that, the wine cork project that we were doing is not going to turn into a coffee table book that I'm going to create, because I don't know how to use CAD well enough to make pictures, then she was done. Even though we made some things useful for her, like a pencil holder upright, a pencil holder flat. Now, the third problem is they may build it, but they may not understand it, especially in Scratch, where you can remix code. Students can start a project from someone else's and just make maybe cosmetic changes, or maybe just little changes, so big parts of their code they don't understand. And they actually interviewed children who had made Scratch projects, and they did find that they didn't understand a lot of the code that they had in the summer program they had done that emphasized remixing and really emphasized the end product over the learning process. So constructionism definitely has big positives in terms of engagement, but we need to temper that with what are our learning goals and how can we keep the engagement while still trying to get those learning goals satisfied.